My dad left me at 9 to vacation with his new wife and her spoiled daughter. Now they're back begging for help, but I hold the move they never expected. Dad left me alone to vacation with my stepfamily, but now wants me to give a boost to my stepsister. Alright, so let me tell you about how everything went downhill after my mom passed away. I was only 9 years old when it happened, and back then it felt like everything in my life just stopped making sense. I mean, my mom was my whole world, you know? She was the one who made everything feel normal and safe. But when she passed, that safety kind of disappeared, and everything changed. At first, I thought maybe my dad Mike, he's 47 now, but back then he was in his mid-30s, would hold things together. I guess I just assumed that since he was my dad, he'd step up. Spoiler alert, he didn't. I mean, for a little while things were fine. It was just me and him, and we tried to find some kind of routine without Mom. He'd take me to school, we'd have dinner together, and it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't terrible either. Then, about a year later, he started dating this woman, Jane. I didn't know much about her at first except that she was younger than my dad, like 12 years younger, so she was 35. I remember the first time she came over to our house for dinner. She seemed nice enough, I guess, but looking back, I should have seen the warning signs from day one. Jane didn't waste any time moving in after they got serious. It wasn't long before she brought along her daughter, Betty, who was 17 at the time. And let me tell you, Betty was the definition of spoiled. From the minute they walked through the door, it was like they owned the place. Jane didn't even try to make me feel included. She just took over like she'd been running the show forever. And my dad, for some reason, just went along with it. Now, I was just a kid, 9 years old, and I was still grieving the loss of my mom, so I didn't really know how to deal with any of this. But I noticed pretty quickly that my dad started changing. He wasn't really my dad anymore. It was like Jane became the priority, and I was. I don't even know how to describe it. Like I was there, but I wasn't important. Things started getting worse when it became clear that I wasn't treated like a kid in my own home. You'd think after losing my mom, my dad and Jane would have some level of sympathy or understanding, right? But nope. Instead, they started treating me more like the maid than a family member. Jane had this thing where she'd give Betty every bit of attention, while I was the one stuck doing all the chores. I wasn't allowed to say anything either because apparently that was just how things worked now. It got to the point where I was cleaning up after Betty constantly. I mean, she was 17, but she acted like a toddler, leaving her mess everywhere, and it was always up to me to clean it up. Betty would be out with her friends or sitting around watching TV, while I was stuck washing dishes, vacuuming, or doing whatever chore Jane threw my way. And my dad. He didn't do a damn thing to help. He acted like it was normal for his 9-year-old daughter to be treated like a housekeeper. I couldn't understand why he was okay with it, but at the same time, I didn't know how to speak up either. But you know what really did it for me? The Christmas trip. This part still makes my blood boil when I think about it. That Christmas, they all decided to go on a vacation together. My dad, Jane, and Betty. They were going somewhere nice. I think it was a cabin up in the mountains or something. I was excited at first because, I thought I was going too. It's Christmas, right? Family time and all that. But nope. I got told that I had to stay home and look after Betty's dog, Max. They actually made me stay behind for a dog while they went off on this fancy vacation. Now let me be clear, I love dogs. Max was a good dog, but he wasn't my dog. He was Betty's dog. I tried to suggest that we take Max to a boarding place or hire a pet sitter, but Jane shut me down real quick. She said something about it being a waste of money, and that I was perfectly capable of staying home alone for 3 days to look after him. I was freaking 9 years old, and they left me there by myself to take care of the house and the dog while they went off and had a great time. I remember sitting in the living room that first night feeling completely abandoned. I was scared, sad, and angry all at the same time. It was Christmas, for crying out loud. And instead of being with my family, I was stuck at home watching some hyper dog that wasn't even mine. It felt like my dad didn't care about me anymore, like I wasn't part of his new family. What hurt the most was knowing my dad was okay with all of this. He didn't fight for me, didn't make an effort to include me. He just went along with whatever Jane wanted, and what she wanted was for me to stay out of the picture. That Christmas marked a huge turning point for me. From that moment on, I started feeling more and more distant from my dad. He wasn't the same guy I used to look up to. He became someone who let Jane call the shots, and I was always the one getting the short end of the stick. Every holiday, every family event, it was always about Jane and Betty. I was just there in the background, expected to do what they wanted. Honestly, looking back, I wish I had spoken up more, but at 9, what was I supposed to do? I didn't have the words or the courage to stand up to my dad or Jane. I just took it, and that's probably why things kept getting worse over the years. But here's the thing. I wasn't completely alone. After that awful Christmas, my Aunt Sarah, who was my mom's sister, came over with my cousin Danny. They had heard what happened and made it their mission to make me feel better. They brought over Christmas presents, cooked a big dinner, and made it feel like a real holiday, even though it was after the fact. Danny even stayed over to help me take care of Max, even though she didn't have to. That's when I realized that my real family wasn't the people living under the same roof as me. It was the ones who actually cared about me. Aunt Sarah and Danny became my rock after that. They didn't need to step up, but they did, and that's something I'll never forget. If it wasn't for them, I don't know how I would have gotten through all those years of being treated like I didn't matter. That Christmas showed me who my real family was, and it sure wasn't my dad or Jane. Alright, so let me tell you about how things played out after that whole Christmas mess. Like I said, after that holiday I started pulling away from my dad. I mean, how could I not? It felt like he'd picked his side and it wasn't mine. But there's more to this story, and honestly, the stuff that happened after just confirmed that I was never going to be treated like part of the family. First off, things with Jane didn't get any better. Actually, they got worse. She started getting more comfortable in her role as the queen of the house, which meant I had more responsibilities dumped on me. By the time I was 12, I was doing everything around the house: laundry, dishes, vacuuming, you name it. And every time I'd ask for some help, Jane would just smile and say, "It's good practice for when you have your own home one day." Like, what? I was 12. I didn't even know how to cook for myself, but she expected me to keep the entire house spotless. Betty, on the other hand, was still the golden child. She was 17 when Jane and my dad got married, and let me tell you, she knew how to play her mom like a fiddle. Anytime Jane was about to ask her to do something around the house, Betty would magically come up with some excuse: homework, hanging out with friends, or some kind of important thing she had going on. And every time, Jane would just let it slide. Meanwhile, I'd be scrubbing the floors or cleaning up after their little family dinners. It's like they expected me to disappear into the background and just be their unpaid maid. But you know what really pissed me off? The way my dad just sat there and let it all happen. He'd be sitting in his chair, watching TV, while Jane barked orders at me like I was some kind of servant. He didn't say a word. Not once did he step in and say, "Hey, maybe you should help out too," to Betty, or even Jane. I don't know if he was too scared to stand up to her, or if he just didn't care. Either way, it hurt. One time, when I was about 14, I actually tried to talk to him about it. I told him I didn't think it was fair that I was the only one doing all the work while Betty did nothing. And you know what he said? "Life's not always fair. You just have to deal with it." That was it. No empathy, no understanding, just deal with it. After that conversation, I kind of gave up on expecting anything different from him. Now, here's where Aunt Sarah and Danny come back into the picture. See, after that Christmas, they didn't just disappear from my life. They stuck around. Aunt Sarah would come over for birthdays, holidays, and even random weekends just to check on me. Danny was always there too. Even though she was a few years older than me, we got super close. She was like the big sister I never had. We'd hang out at Aunt Sarah's place whenever I needed a break from Jane's constant nagging or Betty's messes. Danny would take me out for ice cream, we'd go shopping, or sometimes we'd just sit around and binge-watch TV shows. She was the first person I felt like I could actually talk to about everything going on at home. She knew how crappy things were for me, and she never made me feel like I was being too dramatic or whatever. One weekend when I was about 16, I was staying over at Aunt Sarah's, and Danny and I were talking about how things were at home. I remember telling her about how Jane had yelled at me for not folding the laundry fast enough that week. It was something so dumb, but it had really gotten to me. Danny just looked at me and said, "You know this isn't normal, right? You're not supposed to be treated like this." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so many years thinking this was just how life was supposed to be that I hadn't even realized how messed up it all was. Danny and Aunt Sarah were always so kind to me, but it wasn't until that moment that I realized how different my life could be if I wasn't stuck in that house with Jane and my dad. It was like something clicked in my brain after that. After that conversation, I stopped caring so much about pleasing Jane or even trying to get my dad to see my side. I started focusing more on school, hanging out with Danny, and just doing things for myself. I still did the chores because I had to, but I didn't let it get to me as much. I just kept my head down and told myself that one day I'd be out of there, and I was right. When I turned 18, I got accepted to college with a full scholarship. That was my ticket out, and I wasn't going to waste it. The day I left for school, Jane didn't even bother to say goodbye. She just gave me a half-hearted good luck and went back to whatever she was doing. Betty didn't care either, but my dad, he actually seemed sad. He hugged me for what felt like the first time in years and told me he was proud of me. It was weird hearing that from him after everything, but at that point it didn't mean much to me. I was too focused on the fact that I was finally getting away from that house. College was a whole different world for me. I got to start over, make new friends, and just live my life without feeling like a burden or a maid. Aunt Sarah and Danny were still my biggest supporters, sending me care packages and visiting whenever they could, and honestly, they were the only family I really cared about at that point. But of course, even though I was gone, Jane and Betty weren't done stirring up drama. About halfway through my first semester, I got a call from my dad. He told me that Jane and Betty had been talking, and they thought it would be a good idea if I came home for the holidays. He made it sound like this big olive branch, like they were finally ready to treat me like part of the family. But I wasn't buying it. I could hear Jane in the background telling my dad what to say, and it was obvious she didn't care about me. She just wanted someone to come home and help with the holiday prep. I wasn't about to fall back into that trap, so I told him I was spending the holidays with Sarah and Danny, and that was that. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "Okay, maybe next time." Yeah, right. I knew there wouldn't be a next time. I was done with trying to make things work with my dad and Jane. They had their chance, and they blew it. I had my real family now, Aunt Sarah, Danny, and the life I was building for myself. So, after all that, I guess the takeaway is this. Sometimes the people you're born into a family with aren't the ones who end up being your real family. Sometimes it's the people who step up when no one else will, and that's exactly what Aunt Sarah and Danny did for me. Alright, so now that I've told you how I got through all that mess with Jane and my dad, let's talk about what happened after I moved out for college. You'd think that after finally getting away from them, things would calm down, right? Well, not exactly. In fact, it feels like that's when the real drama kicked off. And of course, it all came back to one person, Betty. So, I'm a couple of years into college at this point, living my best life. I've got good friends, doing well in my classes, and for the first time, I'm really starting to feel like I have control over my own life. Aunt Sarah and Danny are still super supportive, and I'm visiting them whenever I can. But the whole family situation with my dad and Jane, I was basically keeping my distance. I figured if I just focused on school and stayed away, things would stay peaceful. But apparently, Betty had other plans. One day, I get this random message from her. Now, let me just say, me and Betty never really talked. She was always doing her own thing, and like I said before, I was just the maid in her eyes. So when I saw her name pop up on my phone, I was like, what now? She starts off acting all friendly, like we've been best buds this whole time. She's asking me how college is, what I'm studying, all that fake small talk, and I'm just sitting there like, okay, what's she getting at? Because let's be real, Betty wasn't messaging me out of the goodness of her heart. Then she gets to the point. Turns out, she's having some trouble with her own college stuff. And by trouble, I mean she failed a couple of classes and was struggling to stay in school. Of course, Betty being Betty, she wasn't taking any responsibility for it. She blamed it on her professors, on the unfair assignments, basically on everything but herself. And then she hits me with the real reason she's messaging. Hey, would you mind helping me out with my classes? Maybe write a couple of essays for me? I know you're really smart, and it would mean a lot. Yeah, you read that right. Betty wanted me to do her homework for her. After all those years of treating me like crap, ignoring me, and acting like I didn't exist, she suddenly needed my help. I honestly couldn't believe she had the nerve to even ask. So I sat there for a minute thinking about how I should respond. Part of me wanted to just blow up on her, to let all those years of frustration come out. But I knew that wasn't worth it. Betty wasn't worth the energy, so instead I kept it simple. I messaged back and said, "Sorry, Betty, I've got my own work to focus on. Good luck with your classes." That was it. I didn't owe her any explanation, and I wasn't about to get sucked into her crap. Of course, she didn't take that well. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying stuff like, "I thought we were family, and you're supposed to help your sister out when she's struggling." Sister? Since when did she consider me her sister? I wasn't about to let her manipulate me, so I just ignored the rest of her messages. But here's where things get interesting. After I turned Betty down, it wasn't long before I heard from Jane. She calls me up, and I can already tell she's pissed. She starts going off about how I'm being selfish for not helping Betty, and how I'm throwing away an opportunity to bond with my stepsister. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like, really? After everything, they were still expecting me to bend over backward for them? I told Jane straight up that I wasn't going to do Betty's work for her, and if Betty was struggling, maybe she needed to take responsibility for once. Jane did not like that answer. She started ranting about how I owed it to the family to help out, how I should be grateful for everything they'd done for me. Grateful for what? For treating me like a servant for most of my childhood? For leaving me behind every time they went on vacation? I wasn't having it. I ended up cutting the conversation short and telling Jane I wasn't going to change my mind. I hung up before she could keep going, and honestly, I felt pretty damn good about it. For the first time, I was setting a boundary with them, and I wasn't backing down. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, my dad calls me. Now, I hadn't heard much from him since I'd moved out, so I was kind of surprised he was reaching out. He starts off trying to make small talk, asking how school is going and all that, but I knew where this was headed. Sure enough, after a few minutes, he brings up the whole Betty situation. He tries to play the peacemaker role, telling me that Jane's really upset and that maybe I should reconsider helping Betty out. He even threw in the classic family sticks together line like that was supposed to change my mind. I couldn't help but laugh a little when he said that. I mean, where was all this family talk when I was the one being left behind? Where was this togetherness when I was the one cleaning up after everyone? I told him straight up that I wasn't going to be guilted into doing something that wasn't my responsibility. If Betty couldn't handle her own schoolwork, that was on her, not me. Dad didn't argue much after that. He just sighed and said, "I'm disappointed, but I understand." And that was the end of that conversation. I hung up feeling a weird mix of emotions, proud of myself for standing my ground, but also kind of sad that this was what my relationship with my dad had come to. I mean, deep down, I still wanted to have a real connection with him, but every time we talked, it felt like there was this huge wall between us. Anyway, after all that, I didn't hear from Betty or Jane for a while, which was honestly a relief. I focused on my classes, hung out with my friends, and just tried to keep moving forward with my life. I wasn't going to let their drama drag me down anymore. Then, a few weeks later, I got a call from Aunt Sarah. She'd heard about the whole situation with Betty and Jane, and she just wanted to check in on me. We ended up talking for hours, and she reminded me that I didn't owe anyone anything. "You've got your own life to live," she said. "Don't let them make you feel guilty for doing what's best for you." She was right, of course, and hearing it from her made me feel even more confident in my decision. I wasn't going to let my dad, Jane, or Betty make me feel bad for putting myself first for once. I had spent too many years being pushed around and overlooked, and now that I was finally starting to build something for myself, I wasn't about to give that up. So yeah, that's the story of how Betty tried to drag me back into the chaos, and how I said no for the first time, and honestly, it felt pretty damn good. Alright, so here's where things really took a turn. I was doing my thing, focused on school, staying away from all the drama back home with Jane and Betty, and for a while, it seemed like they finally got the message to leave me alone. But of course, peace didn't last long. One day, out of nowhere, I get this email from my dad. It wasn't anything long or dramatic, just a quick note saying he and Jane wanted to talk right away. I knew something was up. I hadn't heard from them in months, so if they suddenly wanted to have a talk, it wasn't going to be good. Still, I figured I'd hear them out because, despite everything, a small part of me still wanted to believe maybe they'd changed. Spoiler alert, they hadn't. So, I agreed to meet up with them. We decided on this little coffee shop in my hometown, a neutral place where I could make a quick exit if things got bad. I walked in, and there they were, sitting at a table like nothing had ever happened. My dad looked tired, like older than I remembered, and Jane, well, she looked the same. Cold, detached, like she had somewhere better to be. After some awkward small talk, they finally got to the point. Jane, of course, was the one who spoke first. She always liked to control the conversation. "We've been talking about the future," she said in that fake sweet voice she used when she was trying to sound reasonable. "And we think it's time for you to start thinking about your responsibilities." I was confused. Responsibilities? What do you mean? That's when she hit me with it. "Father and I are getting older, and Betty is going to need some help getting settled in life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't talking about my future, they were talking about Betty's future, and somehow, in their minds, I was supposed to play a role in making sure Betty was taken care of. You know, the same Betty who never lifted a finger to help me, who treated me like trash, who I hadn't spoken to in months because she only ever reached out when she needed something. "Wait, you want me to help Betty?" I asked, trying to keep my cool but already feeling the anger bubbling up. My dad finally spoke up then, his voice tired and resigned. "She's struggling, and we just thought that as her sister you'd want to help out. You're doing well for yourself, and we thought maybe you could, give her a little boost." Give her a boost? Was this a joke? They wanted me to financially support Betty now? The same Betty who couldn't even bother to message me unless she needed homework help? I felt like I was in some twisted alternate reality where everyone had lost their damn minds. I leaned back in my chair trying to process what they were asking. "So, let me get this straight," I said, looking directly at Jane because I knew she was the mastermind behind all this. "You want me to take money that I'm earning from the life I've built for myself and just hand it over to Betty? Why, because she can't get her life together?" Jane didn't even blink. "It's what family does. We help each other, and since you're doing well, we thought it would be fair for you to help your sister out." At that moment, something in me snapped. All those years of being treated like I didn't matter, like I was just there to serve them, came rushing back. I couldn't believe the audacity of what they were asking. "I'm not doing it," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not responsible for Betty's life. She's a grown woman, and if she can't figure things out, that's on her, not me." My dad tried to jump in, but I wasn't done. "Do you even hear yourselves? After everything, you still expect me to just drop everything and fix Betty's problems? You never helped me when I needed it. You let me clean up after her, let me be the one who was always left behind while you all went on vacations. And now you expect me to save her? No. Jane's face hardened, and I knew what was coming next. She always had a way of flipping things to make me feel guilty. You're being selfish, she said, her voice cold. We've done so much for you, and this is how you repay us? By turning your back on your family? I couldn't help but laugh at that. You really think you've done so much for me? Leaving me behind on holidays, making me do all the work around the house while Betty got a free pass, never once treating me like I mattered? That's what you consider helping me? My dad looked down at his hands, not saying anything. Jane, though, wasn't backing down. We gave you a home, we raised you, and this is the thanks we get? You're going to regret this one day when you realize how much we did for you. At that point, I was done. I stood up, grabbed my stuff, and looked them both in the eye. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice steady. I've built my life on my own without your help. If Betty needs support, then maybe it's time you step up and help her yourselves, but I'm not going to be a part of this. I walked out before they could say anything else, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt angry, but at the same time, relieved. I had finally said everything I'd been holding in for years, and it felt good. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their toxic cycle. I was done being the one who was always expected to sacrifice for everyone else. After that, I didn't hear from them for a while. No calls, no messages, nothing. And honestly, that was fine by me. I focused on my school, my friends, and the life I was building for myself. I knew that no matter what, I had Aunt Sarah and Danny, and they were my real family, the ones who had actually been there for me, not just when it was convenient, but when it mattered. I guess the lesson in all this is sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who has your back, and who treats you with respect. And Jane and my dad, they never did any of that. So yeah, I walked away from them, and I don't regret it. So, after all that mess with Jane and my dad, you'd think I'd finally get a break, right? I mean, I pretty much shut down their whole plan to get me to support Betty, and I walked out of that coffee shop thinking I was done with them for good. But nope, life wasn't about to let me off that easy. A few months after that whole confrontation, I was finally finishing up my last year of college. I had a decent job lined up after graduation, and things were going pretty well. Aunt Sarah and Danny were still my rocks, and I was feeling good about where my life was headed. I'd cut off all contact with Jane and Betty, and the distance from all that drama was honestly the best thing I could have done for myself. But just like clockwork, right when I thought everything was settling down, my dad decided to show up again. I was in the middle of studying for finals when I got a text from him. I hadn't heard from him since that awkward coffee shop meeting, so when I saw his name pop up, my first thought was, what now? The text wasn't long, just him asking if we could talk. No details, no explanation, just, hey, we need to talk. I debated ignoring it, but there was this little part of me that hoped maybe, just maybe, he wanted to apologize or something. So, like an idiot, I texted him back and agreed to meet. We ended up meeting at the same coffee shop as last time. I walked in half expecting to see Jane sitting there with him, but she wasn't. It was just him, sitting alone, looking more worn down than I'd ever seen him. He had this look on his face that told me whatever he was about to say, it wasn't going to be good. We went through the usual awkward small talk, but I could tell he was nervous. Finally, after a few minutes, he just came out with it. Betty's in trouble, he said, his voice low. And I don't know what to do. I felt my stomach drop. Here we go again. What kind of trouble? I asked, already bracing myself for the ridiculousness that was sure to follow. She dropped out of school, he admitted, looking down at his coffee cup. She couldn't keep up with her classes, and she's been making some bad decisions. Now let me stop right here. When he said bad decisions, I knew exactly what he meant. Betty had always been the type to make dumb choices and then expect someone else to clean up the mess. And I had a feeling that this time they were hoping that someone would be me. She's staying with us right now, Dad continued, but Jane and we can't keep bailing her out. She's racked up a lot of debt, and we're not sure how much longer we can keep helping her. I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline. I could already feel where this conversation was headed, but I wasn't about to make it easy for him. Okay, I said slowly, and what does that have to do with me? He looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw actual desperation in his eyes. We were hoping you could help her out. You've got that new job lined up, and you're in a better position to give her a hand. There it was, the moment I had been dreading since the second I saw his name pop up on my phone. They wanted me to bail Betty out again. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my cool. Dad, I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I'm not responsible for Betty. She's made her choices, and if those choices have put her in a bad situation, that's on her. I've worked my ass off to get where I am, and I'm not about to throw that away to clean up her mess. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there staring into his coffee like he was trying to find the right words. Finally, he sighed and said, I understand, I really do, but she's your sister. That was it. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't hold back anymore. She's not my sister, I snapped, louder than I meant to. She's never been my sister. From the minute Jane walked into our lives, you and her made it clear that Betty was the priority. I was never part of the family. I was the one cleaning up after her, the one left behind while you all went on vacations. And now you expect me to save her? No, absolutely not. He looked shocked, like he hadn't expected me to actually call him out like that, but I wasn't done. You and Jane made your choices too. You chose to put Betty first, to make her your priority, and I accepted that a long time ago. But now you're going to have to live with those choices. I'm not going to be your backup plan. If you want to help her, go ahead, but don't expect me to do it. The silence between us was heavy. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but I didn't feel bad about what I said. For once, I was standing up for myself, and it felt damn good. Eventually, he nodded, like he finally understood where I was coming from. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't realize how much we hurt you. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? An apology wasn't going to change anything, and at this point, I wasn't interested in fixing what was broken. I just wanted to move on with my life. We finished our coffees in silence, and when we left the shop, I knew that was probably the last time I'd ever really talk to him. It wasn't a clean break, but it was a break. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Done with the guilt trips, the manipulation, the constant expectation that I was supposed to fix everything. After that, I graduated, started my new job, and kept moving forward. I still have Aunt Sarah and Danny, and they're all the family I need. Betty? I don't know what happened with her, and honestly, I don't care. She's made her choices, and now she has to deal with the consequences. As for my dad, I haven't heard from him since that day in the coffee shop. Maybe he's realized that I'm not going to be the safety net they thought I was, or maybe he's too embarrassed to reach out. Either way, I'm at peace with it.